Like I'm watching every weather map, I'm looking at the radar, I'm like tracking it, which way was that path headed? Because for me, the way I prepare is to like really get to know what's about to happen as best as I can. And it looked like a lot of people didn't know what exactly would happen. But as best as I could, I'm on all those Weather Channel apps and, whatever, trying to figure it out. Maybe some of you are like that too, and some of you are just like, yeah, I don't know, I'm just here for the ride. Either way, as I think about this passage today, I think about us sort of doing some research to really get to know what's about to happen. So as we encounter this passage today, one commentator put it this way: when you look at the book of Exodus, it is probably one of the most God-centered books that you can find, because as you read this book, you will see exactly who God is and what he's like. So as we go into this chapter specifically, my hope is that you will really, really see who God is. But not just that, picture this epic showdown that's about to occur. Just like two heavyweights that we had like last night in the football game, Alabama and Georgia. We've got two heavyweights that are going to fight against each other, except here in the Bible, it's literally the forces of good versus the forces of evil. It's God versus Satan. This is a showdown like none other you see until we get into the New Testament, that God is battling Satan here in the book of Exodus. You might think it's Moses versus Pharaoh, but it's actually God versus Satan. All right, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to see what it's like to know God, to see who he is, and also to see who Satan is. So we're going to kind of do some research on these opponents today, all right? So I'm going to backtrack into verse 22 of chapter 5 first. To kind of catch you up to speed, if you're new, you're jumping into the book of Exodus, Moses is this really famous Bible character, but you wouldn't have guessed that he would be. He's very reluctant. He continues to be so in this chapter today. First of all, he almost didn't make it. His mom hid him away on this little boat that floated down the river. Pharaoh's daughter found him. He was brought up in the house of Pharaoh. You thought, okay, well, this guy has the right kind of upbringing. But then he offs a guy, and then he runs away. And we're like, okay, what's happening here? But God says, Moses, you're my guy to lead my people, to bring them out of slavery, out of Egypt. And Moses, just the whole way, is saying, that's not what I want to do. That's not where I want to go. So he then says, okay, God, I'm going to do it. That's chapter 4, and he goes to chapter 4 into chapter 5. He goes in to meet Pharaoh for the first time, and he says, Pharaoh, you need to let our people go. And we're all like, okay, Pharaoh's just like, sure, Moses. No, he doesn't do that at all. Pharaoh says, no way. I don't know who your God is, and this is never going to happen. Moses walks away. And as he walks away, he's like, this is terrible. But then it just gets worse because Pharaoh says, look, here's what I'm going to do. You guys are being a little lazy. I don't like what I'm hearing. I'm going to increase your workload. So things go from worse to even worser. Is that the right English? I'm not sure. And Moses is sitting there like, what happened? So verse 22, he says to the Lord, oh Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all. God, I came to you because I thought that you were going to take care of all of this. I did what you said, and look where it's gotten me. This was our talk last week, and I'll sum it up in just 60 seconds. When you think you're being obedient to God and things go from worse to even worser, here's how God responds to Moses. He says, Moses, I am with you. If you go to verse 1 of chapter 6, he says, "But the Lord said to Moses, 'Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land.'" Moses is down and discouraged. He's like, "God, why didn't you come through? Where were you?" And the Lord responds patiently with Moses. He says to Moses, "Look, you're going to see what I'm going to do. With a strong hand, I will send them out. With a strong hand, I will drive them out." It's a double emphasis. "Moses, I got this." Verse 2, God spoke to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them." This is really interesting. God saying, "Look, Moses, I'm going to do this. What I promised to do, I'm going to do it. In fact, let me just take you back, Moses, for a second to who I am. Let me take you back for a second to remind you what I'm like." And this is what this whole talk's going to be about. Like, how do we know who God is? And God says, "I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." And he goes back to these original patriarchs, to Abraham, the one whom he chose out of all people to say, "I'm going to make a family out of you." And God, through his covenant with Abraham, said, "I'm going to bless the world." You think about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and their stories. They're quite amazing, and how they met God and how things happened in their life. Specifically, I think of Jacob. There's a story in Genesis where Jacob wrestles with God. We would believe that it's Jesus who came as like an angel in this appearance in Genesis, and he wrestles with Jacob. It's like, wow, Jacob got this up-close personal view with God. And God says to Moses, "I'm going to show you more of who I am than even what they saw." Because he says, "But by my name," another way to translate name is, in this Hebrew word specifically that's used, is glory. He's saying, "But by my glory, I did not make myself known to them." What God's saying is, when you see me save this people, you're going to see my glory on display like no one else has seen to this point. Verse 4. We're just going to keep walking through the text, and then I'm going to eventually pull some truths out. Verse 4, "I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant." Remember, Moses is down and out. He's discouraged. "God, why would you allow us to go through this? Why didn't you fix this? When I first went to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's made things harder." And God's come back and he says, "Look, here's who I am. I'm the Lord, and I'm about to show my glory. I also want to take you back to the fact that I have given you a promise, this covenant. And I have heard and I have seen. I am not blind to what has been happening." God says he knows, he hears, and then he gives 7 "I will" statements in these next verses from 6 to 8. Listen to these. "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment." Verse 7, "I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord." Take note as you look at these 7 "I will" statements. Did you pick those up? I will bring you out. I will deliver you. I will redeem you. I will take you. I will bring you. I will give it to you. In these 7 "I will" statements, God is saying to Moses who he is and how he accomplishes salvation. In these statements, we have a summary of what salvation is. In the first two I wills, look at this. I will bring you out from under the burdens. I will deliver you. These I will speak of liberation. The third I will speaks of redemption. He says, I will redeem you. The fourth and fifth, adoption. He says, I will be your God. I will take you to be my people. And then the sixth and seventh I will statements speak of an inheritance of what God is going to give his people. This is how God saves. He still saves today. He saves us by these very ways. He liberates us. He redeems us. He adopts us. He gives us an inheritance. He still saves right now. As we see the God who's in Exodus revealed, we can still see and know that same God today. You would imagine that after hearing these promises, God says, okay, look, Moses, I've heard the people. I'm with you. I'm your God. I'm Yahweh. I haven't missed anything. You would think that the people would be, oh, this is great. Okay, God, I hear what you have to say now. Like, let's go. You get to verse 9, though. Look what that says. It goes from 7 I wills to 1 I won't. Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. God has as good as promised what he's going to do for his people. In fact, I didn't mention this just a second ago, but in those I will statements in the Hebrew, they're in the perfect tense, meaning when God says these I wills, they're as good as done. He's speaking as though they have already happened. And when Moses comes and says, look, guys, I know it's been rough. We've had a rough start, but God told me he was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. They would not listen because they had a broken spirit because of all they had experienced. It's hard to hear when we go through hard times. It's hard to believe when we haven't seen like what we think should have happened in life. And so these people are that's where they're at. Verses 10 through 13, Moses once again tries to argue with God and say, look, I'm not your guy. The Lord said to Moses in verse 10, go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the people of Israel go out of this land. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me? For I am of uncircumcised lips. I don't know, sometimes you would think the Lord would say back to Moses, okay, yeah, like you are, have a good life. But he doesn't do that. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a charge about the people of Israel and about Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the people out of Egypt. Then in verses 14 through 25, I will refrain from reading all those verses. It's a genealogy. I'm refraining mostly because I don't want to butcher every other name in this list. You might be tempted to think, well, what are genealogies there for? Why are they so important? Well, they are very important. They're a critical part of this story. I'm not just skipping over them because I don't think so. In fact, if you look at the genealogy, you'll see that God works through a family. That's how God works. He's a relational God. He works through his people. You'll see in this list, if you start tracing back the names and the stories that are in this genealogy, you'll see a God whose promises are coming true and that his covenant never fails. So 14 through 26, we have a genealogy that kind of gives us those kind of truths. And then we get to verse 26 again, and Moses is saying, God, I'm not your guy. The Lord has said to him again, verse 26, bring out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt by their hosts. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the people of Israel from Egypt, this Moses and this Aaron. So this genealogy that we just read, that's the Moses and Aaron that God's talking to. In verse 28 through 30, God says again to Moses, go. And Moses says, I'm of uncircumcised lips. How will Pharaoh listen to me? He's still saying, I don't know why you've picked me. Moses is arguing, but God responds again. Verse 1 of chapter 7. We're in our final 13 verses here. And the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like a god to Pharaoh. God is saying to Moses, see, I have put my power in you so that Pharaoh and all of Egypt can see me by your work. And he says, I've made you like a god to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart. He reminds Moses this again. He's already told Moses this is how it's going to go down, that Pharaoh's not going to listen immediately. In fact, God's playing a role in this. We'll get to more of that next week, of what that actually means. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Moses, look, this is going to be a rough road ahead, he's telling him. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my host, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. But I will win, Moses. Verse 5, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them. That's the second time in this passage that God has said, so that they will know that I am the Lord. Next week we'll get even deeper into that phrase because it's repeated over and over in chapters 7 through 10. But God is saying, Moses, what I'm about to do is so that people will know me. Moses and Aaron did so. They did just as the Lord commanded them. That's verse 6. Verse 7, now Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. A couple 80-year-olds walking into Pharaoh's palace. They're like, hey, buddy, God's got something for you, and you need to let the people go. So imagine all of this leading up to this heavyweight showdown. We're about to really, really get into it. Verse 8, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, prove yourselves by working a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff, cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast his staff down before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Some of you guys have seen the movies, the ones that have been made about this story, Prince of Egypt, potentially, and you've seen that staff turn into a snake. It's actually really interesting. Commentators like to argue back and forth what kind of snake it was, or if it was a snake. Some are like, because the Hebrew word literally means like a large reptile. And so some are like, I think it was an alligator or crocodile, whatever they have there. They threw that down, and that's what it became. It's possible that's what it became. I don't know. Some say cobras, some say snakes. It's a little different word than what's used previously when the staff goes down and becomes a snake. So it's some kind of reptile, but picture a cobra on the ground when Aaron puts the staff down, and then the magicians do it too. Like, what is going on here? This is a battle of supernatural proportion. That there is more than what meets the eye for both God and the work of the enemy through Pharaoh. Each man cast down a staff, they became serpents, but Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Verse 13, still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. So that's our verses for today. I'd like just to take a step back for a minute and give some truths about God. This past week, we're still unpacking boxes at our house. I think we've been in our house maybe a couple months. I've lost track of time. We moved over the summer. And as we're unpacking boxes this week, I think the kids were out of school and they had nothing better to do than to get into some old yearbooks that we had. So we're pulling out the old yearbooks, mom and dad's yearbooks, and they're reading through them, and they're reading all the comments, when you sign on the yearbooks, like what people say about you. And as they're reading those comments, they're just having the best time of their life. And mom and dad are like just laughing at all of it. They're reading these comments about what our friends had to say about us in high school. And it was all over the place, as you can imagine. And as they're reading that, they're starting to come to some ideas of what I was like, what my friends were like, etc. as they read a little paragraph. I mean, it's not more than like 5 sentences, but they're like, you were friends with this person, and they were like this, and they're coming up with like a whole story of like what happened. I'm like, no, you actually got that completely wrong. I promise, I'm not just trying to save face. It really was not like that at all. For whatever reason, people sign yearbooks in a weird fashion. So the reason I'm bringing that story up is because like we're tempted to think that we can know someone in some way or form or fashion, even by like a few words. But here in Exodus, we're really getting like a great picture of God. In these words, we're really getting like a full picture of who God is. We're getting to see what he's like and what he's capable of. And even more than that, as I mentioned in that 5th verse of chapter 7, God wants to be known. He says, so that people will know. When I think of like a president or a king or a queen or some dignitary, I think of people who are in that kind of spotlight and that kind of power, and I don't think of them wanting to really make themselves fully known to people. They're not going around like sharing everything that happens behind closed doors in their life to like really get a full picture of who they are. They try to keep that side of them secret, at least from my experience, what I've seen. And with God, he's saying, no, I want you to know me for all that I am. So who is this God? And I want to give you 4 truths that I believe you can pull out of these verses that we read today. Number 1, God is a God who reveals himself. What I was just saying, that God makes himself known, and with that, he never lies. This is a God who reveals himself. He makes himself known, especially at moments like where Moses is at when he's discouraged. The way that God combats discouragement in our lives is by showing us more of who he is. When we get discouraged and we get downtrodden and we're like, God, it doesn't seem like you're anywhere to be found. If you're quiet enough and if you're open enough, I believe that God will meet you there and he'll show you more of who he is through that, not less of who he is through that. He's saying to Moses, come get to know me. You can trust me. If you're lacking trusting in God, it may be because you haven't gotten to know him like you could. As you read the story of Exodus, we will see with all of what's happening that this becomes less about what God does and more about who God is. Any action of God is ultimately pointing to his character. So God speaks truth about who he is, what he'll do. As he sits there and confronts Moses, he makes himself known. In contrast, you have Pharaoh, who doesn't live in line with the truth, whom we kind of like just have this shadowy figure. We don't know too much about him. And in fact, in chapter 5, Pharaoh says that God is lying when in fact we know that Pharaoh was the one lying. So God reveals himself in truth, and he never lies. When you think of God versus Satan, Satan is known in the scripture as the father of lies, as Satan works that way to bring about in our lives different pieces that we're tempted to believe that are just flat out lies. And God always speaks to us in truth and always in revealing more of himself to us. Number 2, God repeats his words and he never retracts his words. So Moses comes back to God and he says, why did you do this? Why haven't you saved us? And God doesn't say, oops, I didn't see that coming, Moses. Basically, God just says, again, what he's already told Moses. In fact, like when I read 4 to 7, these chapters in Exodus, I'm like, we're just covering the same material. Moses says to God, I can't do this. I don't have what it takes. God says, Moses, you have me, and I'm going to do it. And he says it again. He says it again. Now, why is that? Why do you think it's just repeated over and over again? Like, why is this recorded in Scripture for us this way? We could have just like kind of, I don't know, if you're like me who loves efficiency, we could have crammed this all down to just a few verses. We didn't have to have several chapters of this. And I think it's because this is exactly what we're like. That we'll go to God over and over again. God's calling us out. He's moving us forward, and we're like, I don't think I'm the person. I think you got the wrong person. God, I hear what you're saying, and I think you're good, but I don't know. I don't know if I quite believe it right now. So we see a God who repeats his words to us in patience, and he never retracts his words. He doesn't come back and say, never mind what I said earlier, let's switch it over. In contrast, you have Pharaoh acting in line with Satan, who will say one thing and then he'll retract it. And that happens over and over in the story. He'll make a promise and he'll break it. So God repeats his word. He never retracts his word. Number 3, God reassures Moses. And in his promises, you'll see they'll never fail. God reassures and his promises never fail. As I was working through this passage, I could not get over those 7 I will statements. The way in which God was saying, I will do this. I will. If you are ever struggling in life, which we all do, if we're not there now, we will be shortly. And as you're sitting there struggling, you don't have the reassuring confidence and promise of God. And instead, you have discouragement and anything else that might speak into your life that would move you away from reassurance, then that isn't God. That isn't God. The way that we see God interact in this passage, and the way that we see him interact over and over in the scriptures, is that when his people struggle, he gives them reassurance. He takes them back to his promises, and he tells them his promises will never fail. Again, he will not come back and say, well, I thought it was going to work, and it just didn't work out, and I guess you weren't up to the task. Maybe we'll get there next time. No, he always comes through, and he always reassures us. In contrast, you have Pharaoh, who will promise to let the people go, and he won't hold to his promise. Number 4, we have a God who reckons, and he never loses. So in this little warm-up exercise of this giant showdown that's coming with God's great acts in the rest of chapter 7 and 8 and 9, in this little warm-up act where they throw down the staffs and they become snakes, or whatever they become, God immediately shows what he's going to do. That staff swallows up the other snakes. God is coming to set things straight, and he will redeem his people because he is the all-powerful God who is over all others. God reckons and he never loses. So I had kind of like a scary moment a couple weeks ago that shouldn't have ever been scary to begin with, but I thought I was going to get arrested, and yeah, you can laugh, it's fine. No big deal. I thought I was going to get arrested, and I thought that's going to be bad. I don't think that's good for a pastor to get arrested, so this is not great. But I had somebody call me and said they were a police officer, and they had a warrant for my arrest. And I was like, okay, this is great. What are you talking about? Well, you missed all your court dates you were supposed to be at. And I was like, well, what court dates are we talking about here? And I started to think, maybe I did miss some court dates because I moved this summer, and and all the commotion, I very well could have missed some court dates I didn't even know about. And so they said, yeah, you were supposed to be on a jury and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. They're like, well, I'm sorry to say, but because of that, you're under arrest, and you have a warrant out for your arrest. And I was like, oh, great. And so I'm telling my wife I'm about to get arrested. And in my head, I'm like, well, this has got to be a scam. There's no way this is real. But there's also part of me that, when I looked at the caller ID, it was coming from the Clark County Sheriff's Office. And I was like, this seems for real. And so I'm back and forth. Is this a scam? Is this not a scam? I'm about to get arrested. And I'm going through a whole progression of what that will look like, whether a pastor get arrested. And so no one will understand. I moved. They just they'll just know I got arrested. So that's not good. And I'm trying to figure out why aren't they asking for money? I'm like, I know if I'm getting scammed here, they'd be asking for money, but they never ask for money. They're like, you need to go turn yourself in at the department. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like, they have not asked for money at all. And I'm like, if this is a scammer, they'd be trying to get something out of this, but they would just like go down to the police station. And I'm like, okay. Okay, well, the good news is I didn't get arrested. The bad news is I did really take that way too seriously, and I like my heart was beating fast, and I was like, I'm going down. I really thought this. I got scammed. I got taken on that one. I really did, and it's kind of embarrassing to say that. So just know if someone calls you and says that they're the sheriff and you're under arrest, don't just hang up. Don't worry about it. Just take my word for it. I wasted like 20 minutes of my life. And so here's how I finally figured out this was for sure a scam. My best friend works in law enforcement. He's a federal agent. And so I said, you know what? Here's how I'm going to figure out if this is a scam or not. If I really have a warrant, I'm going to call my federal agent friend, and I'm going to say, is there a warrant out for me right now? And so I called him. And honestly, he didn't really assure me very well at the beginning. He's like, well, I'm not sure, actually. And I was like, well, this isn't the best thing to hear right now. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. This. And he even said, like, it kind of sounds legit, actually. And I was like, oh, great. Eventually, he got their number. He called them, and it's a whole good story. You'll have to have me relate to you later. But this is how I knew the counterfeit from the real, was because I went to the real and I could see the counterfeit. I went to the real and he was able to tell me, no, look, this isn't real. I actually got through the Clark County Sheriff's Office, and they assured me I did not have a warrant, and they assured me I was not going to be arrested. And so that was all good news. And they told me they did not have, and I had written down the officers' names, supposed officers. And I was like, they did not have those officers on their staff. I was like, this is great. So I went to the legit, I went to the real to figure out what the counterfeit was. And I think as we are going through the book of Exodus, especially as we approach these next couple chapters, you can see a God for who he really is. You can get a picture of him, and when we see him and get to know him, and as he reveals himself to us, we will see the lies. We will see the things that aren't true. We will see what's true and what's false. God was fully revealed in Jesus. And so for us, we have a picture of God that was even greater, even more glorious than what Moses received. When God said to Moses, I am going to show you my glory, like I did not show Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, here's the story for us. God has shown us his glory in a way that's greater than what Moses received through Jesus. Jesus, fully showing the character of God, made himself known to us. The Bible calls Jesus the Word, because as we go through the Bible, these words are about God. And God became flesh. His word became flesh, and he dwelt among us. God is repeating himself by sending Jesus. In Jesus, we have a reassurance of all the promises of God, that from the beginning when God said he would set things right, that in Jesus, he is setting all things right. God reckons the world through Jesus on the cross, so that those who would oppose Jesus will be judged, but those who turn to Jesus will be saved. So in Jesus, we get a full picture of God. God wants to make himself known. We can see God in this story in Exodus, but we can see him even more clearly in Jesus. That all the things we see about God in Exodus, we see true in Jesus, but even more vibrant and real and close to us. That he became one of us. So I invite you, if you do not know Jesus and you do not feel like you've actually really encountered God, that maybe today would be setting you on that path. If you know Jesus, you know God, you've been walking with him, that every day is about knowing him more. Every day is about knowing him more. And that we have this awesome opportunity to get into a book like this and see him more and more. And I'm very thankful for that.